My name is Eleanor Vance, I'm 72 years old, and my own son told me I was an embarrassment and no longer welcome in his life. All because of a $33 million inheritance. Before I tell you how that one sentence cost him everything he held dear, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. It helps to know I'm not alone in this. The sound of clinking champagne glasses felt a world away. A tinny, distant echo. All I could hear was a low buzzing in my ears as my son's words hung in the air, thick and suffocating. "Mom, you're embarrassing us in front of our new family." David's voice was low, a harsh whisper that cut deeper than any shout could. We were standing in a sun-drenched ballroom at the Napa Valley Country Club. It was supposed to be a joyous day, the christening of my only grandchild, Lily. But as I looked around at the sea of designer dresses and custom-tailored suits, I knew this wasn't about family. It was a performance, and I had just ruined the show. His wife, Tiffany, stood beside him, a perfect porcelain doll with a smile that never quite reached her eyes. She adjusted the strap of her silk dress and gave me a look that was a mixture of pity and disgust. It was a look I had become painfully familiar with over the past few years. Our new family? The words tumbled out of my mouth before I could stop them, my voice barely a whisper. My heart felt like a lead weight in my chest. I glanced over at the other guests, their faces a blur of polite curiosity. They were David and Tiffany's new tribe, bankers, vineyard owners, people whose last names were etched onto buildings. And I, Eleanor Vance, in my simple homemade floral dress, was the relic from a past he was desperately trying to erase. The insult wasn't just in his words, but in the setting he chose to deliver them. In front of everyone. At his daughter's christening. He wanted to make a point. He wanted to show his new wealthy friends that he was one of them now, that he had shed the skin of his humble upbringing. An upbringing I had worked my fingers to the bone to give him. It felt like a physical blow, stealing the air right out of my lungs. For a moment all I could see was his face as a little boy, beaming up at me with flour on his nose in our small bakery kitchen. The same boy who used to tell me my hands, chapped and smelling of yeast and sugar, were magical. Now he looked at those same hands with shame. "We talked about this," David hissed, his jaw tight. "Just for today. Was it so hard to just blend in? Blend in?" He wanted me to become invisible, to erase the 72 years of my life, of his life, that didn't fit into this perfect polished picture he was trying to paint. And that's when something inside me, something I thought had died long ago after his father's funeral, finally snapped. The grief I felt for the son I was losing was suddenly eclipsed by a cold, clear wave of anger. The kind of anger that doesn't scream but calculates. The kind that waits. He had no idea. He stood there, puffed up with his newfound importance, completely oblivious to the fact that the $33 million inheritance from his father wasn't a gift. It was a test. A final test of character from a man who valued loyalty and respect above all else. And David, my son, had just failed in the most spectacular way possible. My eyes drifted from his furious face, scanning the room. I wasn't looking for an escape. I was looking for a weapon. And I found him. Standing near the grand fireplace, holding a glass of sparkling water, was Mr. Peterson, our family's lawyer for over 40 years. He was a quiet, observant man who knew every secret, every joy, and every sorrow our family had ever endured. He'd been watching us, his expression unreadable. Our eyes met across the crowded room. I didn't have to say a word. I just held his gaze, and in that silent, loaded moment I gave him the signal. A slight, almost imperceptible nod. It was done. The gears were now in motion. Mr. Peterson straightened his tie, his face grim. He understood. It was time. The buzzing in my ears stopped. The sounds of the party rushed back in, but they were different now. They were the soundtrack to my son's downfall. A triumphant, terrible symphony. I turned my attention back to David, who was still staring at me, waiting for me to crumble, to apologize, to shrink away as I always did. He saw my silence as weakness. He didn't see the steel that was forming in my spine. He didn't see the storm that was about to break over his head. I saw a flicker of confusion in his eyes, wondering why I wasn't crying. I took a slow, deliberate breath, letting the silence hang in the air for just a moment longer. I looked my son, the boy I raised, dead in the eye, and I opened my mouth to speak the first words that would begin the complete and total dismantling of his new perfect life. But before I spoke those fateful words, my mind flashed back, pulling me into the past. It's a strange and painful thing to realize that a family doesn't break in an instant. It erodes over time, worn down by 1,000 tiny, acidic moments of disrespect. The poison hadn't been administered all at once. It had been a slow drip, seeping into the foundation of our family for the last 5 years, starting the very day we buried my husband, Richard. After the funeral, after the last casserole dish had been returned and the final sympathy card had been read, the house fell into a silence that was heavier than grief. It was an expectant silence. I sat in my armchair, the worn fabric of familiar comfort, while David and Tiffany sat opposite me on the sofa, a noticeable space between them. Richard's favorite chair sat empty beside me, a gaping hole in our lives that I felt with every breath. David was quiet, his eyes red-rimmed and distant, lost in his own sorrow. But Tiffany was already moving on. "We should probably get the house appraised, David," she'd said, her voice a smooth, polished stone skipping across the deep waters of our morning. "Just to know where things stand for the estate. The lawyer will need it." I remember the words feeling like a physical slap. Richard had been gone less than 8 hours. The scent of funeral lilies still hung heavy in the air. "Tiffany," I'd said, my voice barely a whisper, "can we not? Can we just get through tonight?" She'd given me a tight, professionally apologetic smile. "Of course, Eleanor. Forgive me. I'm just a planner. My mind is always thinking 3 steps ahead." That was the first drop of poison. Thinking ahead. For them, Richard's death wasn't just a personal tragedy. It was a logistical problem to be solved, an estate to be managed. In the months that followed, the drips became a steady, corrosive stream. They'd visit my small, cozy home, the same one David grew up in, with the notch on the kitchen doorframe marking his height each year, and their eyes would scan everything with a cold, critical appraisal. "Mom, this wallpaper is so charmingly vintage," Tiffany commented one afternoon, running a perfectly manicured finger over the faded floral pattern in the dining room. The paper had tiny bluebirds hidden in the leaves, and David used to trace them with his finger as a boy, pretending they were his secret pets. A nice neutral taupe or a sophisticated gray would really modernize the space. You know? It would improve the resale value enormously. I looked at David, expecting him to defend the bluebirds, to share the memory. But he just nodded, his eyes avoiding mine. "She's right, Mom. It's a bit dated. We could hire someone to take care of it for you." As if my memories were just an inconvenience that could be scraped off the walls and painted over. Then the focus shifted from my house to me, to my work, my life's passion, the Sweet Traditions Bakery, the place I'd poured my heart and soul into for 40 years, suddenly became a source of secondhand shame. I'd arrive at their sleek, minimalist house for dinner, and the first thing Tiffany would do was hand me a small, embroidered guest towel and point me toward the powder room. "Why don't you freshen up a bit, Eleanor?" she'd say with a bright smile, her meaning perfectly clear. "Wash the smell of honest work off yourself before you sit at my table." The worst was when David began to echo her sentiments. "Mom, your hands," he said one evening, his face pinched with a look of clinical concern as I passed him the salad bowl. "All that flour and hot water. It can't be good for your skin at your age. You should really wear gloves." He said it as though he were worried about my health, but I knew the truth. He was worried about what his new friends would think if they saw his mother's hands, hands that were chapped and work-worn, not smooth and idle like the hands of the other women in his new social circle. The real turning point, the moment I knew I was truly losing him to this new hollow world he was so desperate to conquer, came on Thanksgiving 2 years ago. They were hosting a large, formal dinner party. I was genuinely excited. I'd spent the entire week perfecting his favorite pumpkin pecan pie, the one with the hand-fluted crust he'd loved since he was a boy. When I arrived, Tiffany greeted me at the door with a kiss that hovered an inch from my cheek. "Eleanor, you made it. So glad you could come." Her eyes immediately dropped to the pie carrier in my hands. "Oh, you brought a pie. How lovely and rustic of you. Maria in the kitchen can take that for you." She guided me through the living room, a vast white space that felt more like a museum than a home. A long, elegant dining table was set for 20, shimmering with crystal and silver. But we didn't stop there. She led me straight through the swinging door into the bustling, noisy kitchen. "We thought you'd be more comfortable back here," she said, her voice breezy and final. She gestured to a small wobbly card table set up in a corner, next to the pantry. It was the staff table, for the caterers and the hired help. I just stood there, the pie carrier suddenly feeling as heavy as a block of cement. "What is this, Tiffany?" David walked in then, a glass of wine in his hand, deliberately avoiding my gaze. "Mom, it's a formal dinner. A lot of my business partners from the firm are here. We thought you'd enjoy a quieter spot, away from all the shop talk. You'll be with people people who understand your situation." My situation. The words hung in the air, thick with unspoken contempt. My situation was that I was his mother. The woman who had stayed up all night helping him with science projects, who had sold her own mother's wedding ring to help him with the down payment on his first apartment after his salary at the entry-level job wasn't enough. My situation was that I had loved him unconditionally his entire life, a love he now saw as a liability. I looked at the small, lonely table. Then I looked through the doorway at the grand dining room where my son would be laughing and drinking expensive wine with people who wouldn't know a sourdough starter from a hole in the ground. The pie I'd baked with so much love, with memories kneaded into the dough, suddenly felt like a foolish, sentimental joke. I didn't say a word. I simply turned around, walked out of that cold, white house and drove home, the uneaten pie sitting on the passenger seat beside me, a silent testament to my broken heart. That night, crying into my pillow, I knew the money he was anticipating from his father's will hadn't just changed his life, it had corrupted his soul. But even that deep, gut-wrenching humiliation was nothing compared to what I'd discover when the lawyer finally read Richard's last will and testament. The lawyer's office felt like a different world, a place of hushed tones and heavy decisions. The air was thick with the scent of old leather and polished mahogany. It had been 6 months since Richard's funeral, a period Tiffany had clinically referred to as a respectful waiting period, before the formalities could be handled. I sat on a stiff leather chair on one side of the massive desk, feeling small and out of place. On the other side, David and Tiffany sat together, a united front of eager anticipation. Tiffany was practically vibrating, her fingers tapping a silent, staccato rhythm on her $1,000 handbag. David just looked impatient, repeatedly checking the Rolex on his wrist, a recent self-gift for a promotion at work. Mr. Peterson, his face as somber and lined as it had been on the day of the funeral, cleared his throat and slid on a pair of gold-rimmed reading glasses. He was a good man, a friend of Richard's since they were boys. He had seen our family through births, marriages, and now death. I could see a deep, weary sadness in his eyes as he looked at my son, a sadness that went beyond professional decorum. "As you know," he began, his voice dry as parchment, "Richard's estate is substantial. He was a meticulous planner and a brilliant investor. He worked very hard to build a comfortable life and a legacy to pass on." Tiffany leaned forward, her voice oozing saccharine sincerity. "Yes, Richard was a truly brilliant man. So forward-thinking. We miss him every day." Mr. Peterson's gaze didn't waver from David. He continued as if she hadn't spoken. "David, as his only child and heir, you are the primary beneficiary. Richard has established a trust fund in your name. After a full accounting of all assets, including his investment portfolio, real estate holdings, and life insurance policies, the total value of the trust is $33 million. The number dropped into the silent room like a boulder into a still pond. Tiffany let out a small, sharp gasp, her hand flying to her chest in a perfectly rehearsed gesture of shock and awe. David's eyes, which had been dull with impatience, suddenly lit up with a raw, primal greed. A slow, wolfish grin spread across his face. He shot a quick glance at me, a flash of pure triumph in his eyes as if to say, "See? This is who I am. This is what I'm worth." I felt a hollow ache spread through my chest. I knew this was coming. Richard had told me about the trust, and about the deep-seated fears he had concerning it. "Money is a magnifying glass, Eleanor," he'd said to me one night, long before he got sick as we sat on our porch swing. "It doesn't change people, just makes them more of who they already are. I'm worried about what it will magnify in David." "However," Mr. Peterson continued, his voice taking on a new serious tone that cut through David's triumphant haze. He picked up a single sheet of paper from the top of a thick stack, A document with a simple blue cover. Richard was a very deliberate man. He was also a man who valued character above all else. He included a specific provision in his will, a codicil he added himself just a few years ago. It's unconventional. He asked me to read it to you verbatim, so there can be no misunderstanding. He adjusted his glasses, the slight movement drawing all the attention in the room. The provision is entitled, The Family Covenant Clause. David's smile faltered, replaced by a flicker of confusion. The what clause? Mr. Peterson looked directly at David and read from the document. It is my deepest and most fervent wish that my son, David Vance, live a life guided not by the pursuit of wealth, but by the principles of loyalty, integrity, and family. Therefore, this inheritance is granted under a specific, non-negotiable condition. He paused, letting the weight of the words sink in. To retain full and continued access to the funds within this trust, the beneficiary David Vance must, in the sole and final judgment of the estate's executor and a 3-person review committee, maintain a consistent and demonstrable relationship of respect, love, and care for his mother, Eleanor Vance. The silence that followed was absolute, thick with tension. Tiffany's face had gone rigid, her polished mask cracking. What in the world does that mean? David demanded, his voice sharp with irritation. Demonstrable? How do you demonstrate that? Do I have to send you photographs? It continues, Mr. Peterson said, his gaze as unyielding as granite. This includes but is not limited to regular and meaningful contact, heartfelt inclusion in family events and milestones, and a complete absence of any action, public or private, that could be reasonably construed as disrespect, neglect, or dishonor. Any verified breach of this covenant will trigger an immediate review, which may result in the freezing and potential revocation and forfeiture of the entire inheritance. He placed the paper down deliberately on the desk. The forfeited funds would then be redirected in their entirety to a charitable foundation established in Richard's name, a foundation dedicated to providing culinary arts scholarships for underprivileged youth. For a long moment no one moved. The air was thick with unspoken accusations, with years of small slights and deep hurts. Tiffany was the first to recover, forcing a brittle, unconvincing laugh. Well, that's just Richard for you. Always the sentimentalist. Of course David respects his mother. We all love and adore Eleanor. It's just a sweet formality, really. David stared at the document, then at me. There was no warmth in his eyes, no flicker of understanding. There was only a cold, hard calculation. He saw the clause not as a heartfelt plea from his dying father, but as a legal loophole, an annoying sentimental roadblock between him and his money, an obligation. So what you're saying is my mother holds the purse strings? He asked, a bitter, resentful edge to his voice. Not at all, Mr. Peterson corrected him gently. Your own actions hold the purse strings, David. Your own character. This is simply a reflection of your father's final wish, that you never forget where you came from, and the person who sacrificed so much to raise you. Mr. Peterson pushed a final set of papers toward him. If you agree to these terms, you can sign here. The initial disbursement of funds can be made within the week. David didn't even hesitate. He snatched the pen and scribbled his signature across the page with a sharp, angry flick of his wrist. His eyes were fixed on the $33 million figure typed at the top of the page. He didn't reread the clause. He didn't ask any more questions. He didn't look at me. He just signed his name, sealing his fate. He thought he was signing for his fortune. In reality, he was signing his confession in advance. As they left the office, Tiffany already chattering excitedly about a new summer home in the Hamptons, Mr. Peterson held me back, his hand on my arm. Eleanor, I have to ask, are you sure about this? Richard put this in to protect you, but it could cause a great deal of conflict. I looked out the window at my son getting into his expensive car, already a stranger to me. Richard knew his son and so do I said softly. I didn't want the conflict. I just wanted my son back. But I was beginning to realize that the boy I had raised was already gone. I just didn't know that Tiffany was about to go out of her way to prove it. For a while after the inheritance papers were signed, a fragile artificial peace settled over us. It was like a badly staged play. The phone calls from David became clockwork, every Sunday afternoon at 4 p.m. sharp. The conversations were stilted and hollow, filled with superficial questions about my health and the weather, but he was ticking the box for regular contact. The invitations to brunch at exclusive restaurants were extended, where I would sit and watch Tiffany talk about her decorator and David discuss his golf handicap. I was a prop in their performance, the required beloved mother they had to trot out to satisfy the terms of the will. I knew it was all a charade, a carefully choreographed dance to keep the money flowing. They knew I knew it, but I played along, clinging to a foolish, desperate sliver of hope that perhaps, by going through the motions, some genuine feeling, some echo of the family we once were might resurface. That hope was not just shattered, it was ground into dust about a month before the christening, at the annual Napa Valley Children's Hospital fundraiser. It was the social event of the season, a glittering affair held at a sprawling vineyard estate under a canopy of stars. Tiffany was on the organizing committee, a position she had miraculously acquired almost immediately after the first check from the inheritance cleared. She insisted I attend. "It's for a good cause, Eleanor," she'd said, her voice like honey laced with arsenic. "And everyone who is anyone will be there. You simply have to come." I knew it was just another box to tick on their respectful son checklist, but I agreed. I spent a week carefully altering a simple but elegant deep blue velvet dress. It wasn't a designer gown. It was something far more precious. It was the dress I had worn to my 30th wedding anniversary with Richard. He had looked at me that night, his eyes full of love, and told me I was the most beautiful woman in the world. The dress held that memory, that warmth, and wearing it made me feel close to him. It gave me a quiet confidence that had nothing to do with a price tag. The party was overwhelming, a cacophony of forced laughter and the incessant clinking of glasses. Tiffany was in her element, a shimmering shark gliding through a sea of money, flitting from group to group. She introduced me with a practiced, condescending line. "This is my lovely mother-in-law, Eleanor. She owned a charming little bakery for many years. Isn't that just the sweetest thing?" The words dripped with false admiration, painting me as a quaint, harmless hobbyist rather than a woman who had built a successful business from scratch. I eventually escaped her orbit and found a quiet corner with a few older acquaintances, women who remembered me from the PTA and the early days of my bakery. We were laughing, genuinely laughing, as we reminisced about our children's disastrous school plays and messy finger-painting projects. It was the first time I had felt relaxed all evening. And of course that was the moment Tiffany chose to descend upon us. "Eleanor, there you are," she chirped, her smile dazzlingly bright and utterly false. She was holding a full, deep glass of Cabernet Sauvignon, the wine as dark as her intentions. "I was just telling the mayor how you make the most charming little cupcakes." As she spoke, she gestured grandly with the hand holding the wine glass. Her movement was just a little too wide, a little too theatrical for a woman who was usually so meticulously poised. She stumbled, her ankle twisting in a performance worthy of an Oscar, and the entire glass of red wine cascaded directly down the front of my cream-colored antique lace collar and onto the deep blue velvet of my dress. A collective gasp went through our small group. The dark liquid soaked into the fabric instantly, a brutal, ugly stain against the blue. It looked like a wound, a violent splash of darkness on a cherished memory. "Oh my goodness! I am so terribly sorry," Tiffany cried, her hand flying to her mouth in a gesture of horror. Her eyes, however, were not sorry. They were glittering with a cold, triumphant light. "I'm just so clumsy tonight. Oh, Eleanor, your beautiful dress. It's completely ruined." She began dabbing frantically at the stain with a tiny, useless cocktail napkin, succeeding only in making it worse, smearing the wine deeper into the delicate fibers of the velvet. Her friends rushed over, cooing with false sympathy, their eyes alight with the thrill of the drama. "Don't you worry your pretty little head, Eleanor," one of them said, patting my arm with a pitying look. "I'm sure Tiffany will buy you a brand new one. Something a bit more modern, perhaps." I stood there, frozen, the cold, sticky wine seeping through the fabric to my skin. I could feel dozens of eyes on me, some curious, some pitying, some openly entertained. I wasn't just a woman with a stained dress. I was a spectacle, the clumsy, frumpy mother-in-law, a living prop in Tiffany's little power play. She hadn't just spilled wine on my dress. She had intentionally and publicly defiled a memory of my life with Richard. It was a deliberate act of humiliation, designed to put me in my place, to remind me that in her world, even my most precious memories were worthless. I gently pushed her hand away. "It's quite all right, Tiffany," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "Accidents happen." But I looked directly into her eyes, and for a fleeting second, her mask of concern slipped. I saw the pure, unadulterated malice there. And she saw that I knew. She saw that I understood exactly what she had done and why. I excused myself quietly, my head held high, and walked through the crowd toward the exit, the giant dark stain on my chest a badge of her cruelty for all to see. I didn't let the tears fall until I was safely locked inside my car, the engine running and the doors locked. It wasn't the dress I was crying for. It was for the death of that last, foolish sliver of hope that the son I raised was still in there somewhere, buried underneath the greed and ambition. That night, I sat in my quiet house, the ruined dress lying in a heap on the floor like a casualty of war. I picked up the phone. "Mr. Peterson," I said when he answered, my voice cold and clear. "It's Eleanor Vance. I think we need to talk about the family covenant clause. I believe a significant breach has occurred." A long silence followed on the other end of the line. Then his grave voice came through. "Eleanor, I am so very sorry to hear that. The committee has already agreed that the christening next month, as a major family milestone, will serve as David's final opportunity to demonstrate compliance in a public setting. What happens there will be definitive." I hung up the phone, a cold, hard resolve settling in my heart. Richard's clause wasn't just about respect anymore. It was about justice, and I would make damn sure it was served. The month leading up to the christening was a masterclass in superficial charm. The phone calls from David became more frequent, laced with a new cloying sweetness. Tiffany sent me a ridiculously expensive floral arrangement with a note that read, "So looking forward to celebrating with you." It was all a frantic damage control effort, a show put on for an audience of one me. They must have suspected that their performance at the fundraiser had been poorly received. They were trying to shore up their defenses, to build a case that they were, in fact, the most devoted son and daughter-in-law in all of Napa Valley. Played my part. I was polite on the phone. I sent a thank you note for the flowers. I gave them no reason to believe that anything was amiss. I was a calm sea, hiding a gathering storm beneath the surface. On the day of the christening, I chose my outfit with care. Not the blue velvet dress that was tucked away, a painful reminder of what had been lost. Instead, I wore a simple, elegant lavender dress that I had sewn myself. It was understated, comfortable, and most importantly, it was me. When I arrived at the country club, the event was already in full swing. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and even more expensive ambition. David and Tiffany greeted me at the door, their smiles plastered on. "Mom, you look wonderful," David said, kissing the air beside my cheek. "Eleanor, that color is lovely on you," Tiffany added, her eyes doing a swift, dismissive appraisal of the fabric. I brought with me a single carefully wrapped gift. When the time came, I presented it to them. "This is for Lily," I said softly. Tiffany unwrapped it with performative delicacy. Inside was a hand-knitted baby blanket, woven from the softest merino wool. It was a pattern my own mother had taught me, a tradition passed down through generations. The blanket was intricate, with tiny stitched lambs frolicking across a field of pale yellow. I had spent over 100 hours knitting it, pouring all my love for my new granddaughter into every single stitch. Tiffany held it up by 2 fingers as if it were a soiled dish rag. "Oh," she said, her voice dripping with forced appreciation. "How very folksy." She turned to the small crowd of her friends who had gathered to watch. "Isn't it quaint? Eleanor is so wonderfully traditional." She folded it quickly and handed it off to an assistant. "We'll be sure to put this away for safekeeping," she said, the implication clear. It would be stored in a box, never to see the light of day, certainly not to touch the skin of a child destined for designer onesies. The casual cruelty of it stung, but I kept my composure. This was just another piece of evidence, another log on the fire. The ceremony itself was beautiful, and for a moment, holding my granddaughter in my arms, I felt a wave of pure, uncomplicated love. Lily was perfect, innocent of the drama swirling around her. I whispered a silent prayer for her, that she would grow up to value kindness more than currency. But the moment was fleeting. After the ceremony, during the reception, David pulled me aside. His smile gone, replaced by a tense, worried look. We stood near a large potted fern, partially hidden from the main crowd. "Mom," he began in a low, urgent whisper. "I need to ask you a favor." "What is it, David?" "When you're talking to people, my colleagues, Tiffany's friends, please don't talk about the bakery." I stared at him. "The bakery?" "David, the bakery is my life's work. It's how I put you through college." I know, he said, waving his hand dismissively. "And I appreciate that. But these people, they don't understand that world. Sounds small. It's better if you just say you're retired. Or that you managed investments. Anything but the baking." The sheer audacity of his request took my breath away. He wasn't just ashamed of my work. He wanted me to erase it, to lie about the very thing that defined my life, the legacy I had built with my own 2 hands. He wanted me to wear a costume, to play a part in his fictional life story. He saw the look on my face and his expression hardened. "Mom, please. Don't make this difficult. This is an important day for us. For our image. For Lily's future." I looked from his desperate, pleading face to the crowd of people he was so eager to impress. They were laughing and sipping cocktails, oblivious. They didn't know the price of David's ambition. But I did. The price was his mother's dignity. I took a steadying breath. "No, David," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "No? What do you mean no?" "I mean no. I will not lie about who I am. I am proud of what I do. I am proud of the bakery and everything it represents." A dark cloud passed over his face. The veneer of the dutiful sun cracked, revealing the cold, hard ambition beneath. "Proud?" he scoffed. "You're proud of smelling like bread dough? Mom, you have no idea what's at stake here." Oh, but I did. I knew exactly what was at stake. And as he spoke his next words, I knew he was about to lose it all. "You have no idea what's at stake here," he repeated, his voice dropping to that dangerous whisper again. He glanced around, making sure no one important was within earshot. It was that secrecy, that shame that finally broke the dam of my patience. "Then tell me, David," I said, my own voice rising just enough to be clear and firm. "Enlighten me. What exactly is at stake?" "My reputation," he hissed. "Our future. Tiffany and I have worked too hard to build this life, to be accepted into these circles. I can't have my mother telling the chairman of the board that she gets up at 4 a.m. to knead dough. It doesn't project the right image." The absurdity of it, the sheer, breathtaking snobbery was almost comical. But I wasn't laughing. A cold fury was building inside me. A lifetime of suppressed frustrations finally bubbling to the surface. "The right image?" I challenged him. "What is that, David?" "The image of a man who is so ashamed of his own mother that he has to hide her like a dirty secret? The man who was raised on the profits of that very dough you're so disgusted by." Our raised voices started to attract attention. A few conversations nearby faltered. Tiffany, sensing trouble, began gliding towards us. Her smile fixed but her eyes narrowed with alarm. "Is everything all right over here?" she asked, placing a hand on David's arm, a silent command to de-escalate. But David was too far gone. He shook her hand off. "No, everything is not all right," he said, turning his frustration on me. "My mother is being deliberately difficult." "Difficult?" I echoed, my voice ringing out in the suddenly quiet space. "Because I won't lie for you? Because I won't pretend to be someone I'm not to make your new friends comfortable." "This isn't about you," he shot back, his face flushing a deep, ugly red. "This is about what's best for my family. For Lily." And that was it. Hiding his own selfish ambition behind the name of his innocent daughter. It was the lowest blow of all. That's when he made his fatal error. Instead of pulling me aside, instead of trying to smooth things over, he decided to make a public spectacle of it. He saw the curious glances from his guests not as a warning, but as an audience. He chose to perform. He took a step back, raising his hands in a gesture of weary resignation, addressing the small crowd that had now gathered. "Folks, I do apologize for this little family drama," he said, his voice dripping with condescending magnanimity. "My mother. She comes from a different world. A simpler time. She sometimes has trouble understanding the complexities of our life now. He was painting me as a confused, senile old woman, humiliating me in a way that he hoped would garner sympathy for himself, the dutiful son, burdened by his out-of-touch mother. Tiffany jumped in, playing the part of the supportive wife. "Eleanor, darling, we love you. But you're making a scene. Perhaps you're just feeling a bit overwhelmed." Overwhelmed? They were trying to gaslight me in front of 24 people. But I wasn't overwhelmed. I was incandescent. "No, Tiffany. I am not overwhelmed," I said, my voice clear and ringing. "I am, however, deeply and profoundly disappointed." I turned my gaze back to my son. "David, you talk about your new life. You stand here in your $1,000 suit, in this club that costs more per year than my first house, and you have the gall to be ashamed of me." The room was now utterly silent. Even the bartenders had stopped polishing glasses. "Let me be very clear," I continued, my voice trembling not with weakness but with rage. "Every brick in this new life of yours is built on a foundation that I laid. Every opportunity you've ever had was paid for by flour and sugar and hands that were too tired to ache. This inheritance you're so proud of? It came from your father, a man who respected honest work more than anything in this world. And you are spitting on his memory. You are spitting on everything we ever stood for." David's face was a mask of fury and panic. He had lost control of the narrative. He opened his mouth to retort, but I wasn't finished. This was the moment. The breaking point I had described at the very beginning of my story. The culmination of 5 years of biting my tongue, of swallowing my pride, of absorbing every little cut and insult. He finally spoke, his voice shaking with rage. And he said the words that would sever the final thread between us. "You are an embarrassment," he said, his voice low and venomous. "You come here in your homemade dress, smelling of your little shop, and you ruin everything. You are not welcome here. You are not welcome in our life anymore." The words hit me. And in that moment, as I stood there, publicly disowned by my only child, I didn't feel sadness. I didn't feel hurt. I felt free. He had finally said it. He had drawn the line in the sand, and he had just given me everything I needed. My eyes found Mr. Peterson's across the room. I held his gaze and gave him that final definitive nod. He saw the public execution for what it was, the ultimate violation of the covenant. He closed his briefcase with a soft final click. The sound of a gavel falling. The sound of judgment. The confident smirk on my son's face, the look of a man who thought he had finally won, was about to vanish forever. The soft, decisive click of Mr. Peterson's briefcase seemed to echo in the cavernous silence of the ballroom. As he began to walk toward us, his steps measured and deliberate, a path seemed to clear for him automatically. People sensed that the real drama, the main event, was only just beginning. David watched him approach, a flicker of genuine unease crossing his face for the first time. The confident bully was gone, replaced by a nervous boy being called to the principal's office. "Mr. Peterson," he said, trying to regain control, to assert his authority in a room that was no longer his. "This is a private family matter. I'll have to ask you to step aside." "I'm afraid it ceased to be private the moment you publicly disowned your mother, David," Mr. Peterson replied, his voice calm but carrying the weight of absolute authority. He stopped beside me, a quiet, steadfast presence, his posture radiating a seriousness that commanded respect. "I am here in my official capacity as the executor of your father's estate, and as chairman of the Inheritance Review Committee." Tiffany let out a nervous, high-pitched laugh. "Executor? Committee? What on earth for? Is there a problem with the disbursement from the inheritance? We can clear it up on Monday." "There is a problem," Mr. Peterson stated flatly, his eyes locking onto hers, "with the inheritance itself." He placed his briefcase on a small nearby table and opened it with precision. He took out a crisp, leather-bound folder. "As you were both explicitly and legally informed, your inheritance was conditional. It was contingent upon your strict adherence to the family covenant clause." He didn't need to read it again. The words still hung in the air from that day in his office. David's face paled a sickly, chalky white. That was sentimental nonsense. Dad's way of being dramatic. It's not legally enforceable. Your father was never dramatic, David. He was precise, Mr. Peterson countered, his voice sharp as broken glass. And I assure you it is as legally enforceable as the laws of gravity. He foresaw this. He foresaw a day when $33 million might mean more to you than your own mother. He tapped the thick folder. Over the past 2 years I have been legally obligated to compile a file documenting your compliance, or lack thereof, with this clause. A file which, I'm sorry to say, is filled with evidence to the contrary. He opened the folder, and even from where I stood, I could see it was meticulously organized with tabs and highlighted sections. We have documented instances of neglect. We have your text messages, Tiffany, to your friends, referring to Eleanor as the baker, and a charity case. We have a sworn affidavit from a caterer at your Thanksgiving dinner 2 years ago. We have a detailed report, including photographs, of the incident with the wine-stained dress at the hospital fundraiser. He looked around at the rapt audience. And now today we have 24 witnesses to this public execution. You have, in the clearest, most unambiguous terms possible, violated the core tenet of your father's will. A wave of murmurs rippled through the crowd. This was better than any soap opera. The Vances, one of Napa's newly minted power couples, were imploding in real time. Just then, a man stepped forward from the crowd. It was Arthur Morgan, the owner of a chain of Michelin-starred restaurants and one of the most respected, self-made businessmen in the entire valley. He was a gruff, no-nonsense man in his late 70s who had built his empire from the ground up. "Peterson, forgive me for interjecting," he said, his deep, gravelly voice commanding immediate attention. He looked at David not with anger, but with an expression of profound, weary disappointment. "Son, I've been doing business in this valley for 40 years. I knew your father. He was a man of his word. And I know your mother." He turned his gaze to me, and for the first time that day, someone looked at me not with pity or condescension, but with genuine, unadulterated respect. "Eleanor," he said with a firm nod. Then he turned back to a stunned David. "You stand here, puffing your chest out about your new life, and you have the nerve to be embarrassed by this woman?" He let out a short, sharp laugh that held no humor, a sound like rocks grinding together. "You foolish, foolish boy. You think your mother runs a charming little shop?" David was speechless, his mouth hanging open, his face a mask of confusion. "Let me tell you who your mother is," Mr. Morgan boomed, his voice filling the room, each word landing with the force of a hammer blow. "Your mother is Eleanor Vance. She is not a baker. She is the baker. She is the founder, the CEO, and the creative genius behind the Sweet Traditions brand. Her little shop is now a national chain of 150 high-end patisseries, with a multi-million-dollar wholesale business supplying my restaurants, and dozens of others across the country." A collective gasp swept through the room. It was louder this time, filled with genuine, unadulterated shock. Tiffany looked as if she'd been struck by lightning, her face a frozen mask of disbelief, her mind visibly struggling to process the numbers. Mr. Morgan wasn't done. He pointed a thick, work-worn finger at David. "That inheritance from your father? That's his investment portfolio. It's a nice little nest egg, but it's a drop in the bucket compared to what your mother has built with her own 2 hands. Sweet Traditions is currently valued on the market at over $200 million. She signs the paychecks for over 2,000 employees. The annual salary she pays her top executives makes your entire inheritance look like pocket change." He took a step closer, his eyes boring into David. "We're standing in this country club right now, on land that was part of the old Miller Vineyard. Do you know who bought that land 10 years ago and leased it to the club developers as a silent partner? She did. Your mother. So in a way, son, you're standing in her house drinking her champagne, while telling her she's not welcome." The silence that followed was absolute, deafening. Every eye in the room was on us. David slowly turned to look at me, his face ashen, his eyes filled with a dawning, sickening horror. It was the look of a man who realized he hadn't just made a mistake. He had committed an act of catastrophic, irreversible self-destruction. "Mom?" he whispered, the single word choked with disbelief and a terror so profound it was almost pitiable. I looked at him, not with the warmth of a mother, but with the cool, appraising gaze of a CEO who was about to liquidate a failed and toxic asset. "Mr. Peterson," I said, my voice steady and clear, ringing with a finality that sealed his fate. "Please proceed." "Proceed," Mr. Peterson's voice was grim, leaving no room for negotiation or appeal. Very well. He looked directly at David, who seemed to physically shrink under his gaze, the $1,000 suit suddenly looking 2 sizes too big for him. David Vance, as of this moment, per the authority granted to the committee by the legal framework of the trust your father established, your access to all trust funds is frozen, effective immediately. Given the overwhelming and public nature of this breach, I can tell you that the committee's final ruling will be a formality. You will receive official notification via courier within 72 hours that the full inheritance of $33 million has been, and will be, permanently forfeited. Tiffany let out a sound that was not quite human, a strangled, guttural sob of pure, avaricious grief. It wasn't the sound of a wife seeing her husband's world crumble. It was the sound of a gambler who had just lost everything on a single disastrous bet. The life she had so carefully constructed, the status she had craved, was dissolving into thin air right before her very eyes. The party was over. Not just figuratively but literally. The remaining guests, who had been frozen in place by the drama, suddenly remembered urgent appointments elsewhere. They began to melt away, murmuring excuses, their eyes darting between us, desperate to escape the toxic fallout. They were like sharks that had smelled blood in the water, and they knew a sinking ship when they saw one. Within minutes, the grand ballroom was nearly empty, leaving just the 3 of us, Mr. Peterson, and the glittering silent wreckage of our family. I turned to leave. I had seen enough. I felt emotionally exhausted, drained by the weight of the last 5 years. Mom, wait. David's voice was raw, desperate. He lunged after me, grabbing my arm with a surprising strength. Wait, please. We have to talk about this. I looked down at his hand on my arm, his fingers digging into my skin. Then I looked back up at his face. The arrogance was gone, completely stripped away, replaced by a frantic, pleading panic. I think you've said quite enough for one day, David, I said, my voice cold as ice as I pulled my arm from his grasp. I walked out of the ballroom through the hushed, empty lobby, and into the warm afternoon air. I didn't stop until I reached the quiet solitude of the parking garage. The cool concrete and dim light were a welcome relief from the bright, hot glare of the party and its disastrous end. I was halfway to my sensible 10-year-old sedan when I heard the frantic, uneven clicking of Tiffany's heels and David's heavy, stumbling footsteps echoing behind me. They cornered me near a large concrete pillar, cutting off my path to my car. Mom, you have to stop this, David begged, his voice cracking, his face streaked with tears. You can do that, right? You can call Peterson. Tell him it was a misunderstanding. A stupid family fight. We can fix this. I'll apologize, I'll do anything. Fix this. I turned to face him fully, and for the first time, I let the full weight of my anger and hurt show in my voice. There is nothing to fix, David. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a clarification. You finally showed me who you truly are. I should thank you for your honesty. But I didn't know, he cried, his hands gesturing wildly, nonsensically. A $200 million company? That you own this land? Why didn't you ever tell me? Why did you let me treat you like that? The sheer, unadulterated absurdity of that question, the complete abdication of his own responsibility, hit me like a physical blow. A bitter, weary laugh escaped my lips. Let you? I asked, my voice laced with disbelief. I let you? So it's my fault you were cruel? It's my fault you were ashamed? I didn't tell you, David, because I was waiting for my son to be proud of me because I was his mother, the woman who raised him, not because I was a walking, talking bank account. I wanted you to love me for who I was, not for what I had. And you have just proven to me, beyond any shadow of a doubt, that you are incapable of doing that. Tiffany, who had been silently fuming, finally found her voice. This isn't fair, she shrieked, her voice shrill and ugly in the quiet garage. You tricked us. You set us up. You let us believe you were just some simple old woman living off a pension. I am a simple woman, Tiffany, I retorted, turning my cold gaze on her. I find joy in simple things. Perfectly baked croissant. A child's laughter. The loyalty of family. These are things your money can't buy, and you will never ever understand that. You didn't fall in love with my son. You fell in love with a number in a bank account. And now that it's gone, I wonder what's left for either of you. She flinched as if I'd slapped her, her face contorting with rage. I looked back at my son. His face was a mess of tears and confusion. "Mom, please," he whispered, his fight gone, replaced by a childlike desperation. "I'm sorry. I was wrong. Just tell me what to do. I'll do anything you say." I looked at this broken man before me, this son who had become a stranger, and I felt a profound aching sadness. But it was overshadowed by a hard-won clarity. This wasn't about punishment anymore. It was about consequences. "There's nothing to do," I said, my voice softening slightly, but losing none of its finality. "The committee will follow the instructions in your father's will. It is out of my hands now, as it should be." I started to walk away again. He made one last desperate plea. "But we're family." I stopped and turned back one last time. I looked him straight in the eye, and I asked him the question that had been haunting me for years. The question that would define everything that had happened, and everything that was to come. "Let me ask you something, David. And for once in your life, I want you to be honest with yourself. If I were still just your mother, the baker, with flour on her hands and not a penny to her name beyond her small pension, would you still have wanted me at this party today?" He opened his mouth to answer, a reflexive yes on his lips, but the word died before it was born. He just stared at me, his face crumbling as the horrible, undeniable truth washed over him. And in his horrified, guilty silence, I finally got my answer. And it broke the last remaining piece of my heart. His silence was the loudest confession I had ever heard. It was the final brutal truth stripped bare of all pretenses. He wouldn't have wanted me there. My worth in his world, the world he had so desperately clawed his way into, was directly tied to a balance sheet he never even knew existed. "I thought so," I said softly, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. I turned and walked to my car without another word. I didn't look back. As I drove out of the parking garage and into the fading afternoon light, I caught a glimpse of their two small figures in my rearview mirror, standing lost and alone amidst a sea of gleaming, indifferent luxury cars. The days that followed were a quiet, methodical unraveling of the life David and Tiffany had so proudly and so foolishly built. Mr. Peterson was as good as his word. The official notification, a thick and intimidating package, arrived via a stoic courier 72 hours later. I was sent a copy. The legal language was cold, precise, and utterly unforgiving. Due to a flagrant and public violation of the Family Covenant Clause, as witnessed and documented, all rights to the aforementioned inheritance, in the amount of $33 million, are hereby irrevocably terminated and forfeited. The first domino to fall was the house. The sprawling Napa mansion with its infinity pool and panoramic vineyard views wasn't owned. It was heavily mortgaged, with the staggering monthly payments being drawn directly from the trust. With the trust frozen and now officially gone, the bank issued a formal notice of default. They were given 30 days to vacate before foreclosure proceedings would begin. I pictured Tiffany, the self-proclaimed queen of her castle, reading that notice, her dreams of hosting lavish garden parties turning to dust. Next were the cars. The gleaming black Range Rover Tiffany used for shopping and the sleek silver Porsche David drove to his club. Both were leased, prestigious monthly payments that were now impossible to make. I heard from a friend who lived on their street that two discreet tow trucks had arrived one morning while Tiffany was out. She apparently came home to find the spaces empty and screamed at the gardeners, accusing them of theft, until David had to show her the repossession notices. The public symbols of their status gone in the space of an hour. Then came the social fallout. The membership at the Napa Valley Country Club, the very stage for their downfall, was immediately suspended for non-payment of dues. The invitations to galas, wine tastings, and charity polo matches stopped coming as if a switch had been flipped. In a world built on wealth and perception, they had lost both. They were no longer the hot new couple with a massive inheritance. They were the disgraced son and the greedy daughter-in-law who had committed the ultimate sin in their circle, not being poor, but pretending to be rich and failing so spectacularly. Their story was too messy, too embarrassing. They were toxic assets. I received a call from David about a week after the christening. He wasn't pleading anymore. He was hysterical, a cornered animal lashing out. "They're taking everything," he yelled into the phone, his voice ragged. "The house, the cars. Tiffany's credit cards were all declined at the grocery store today. She had to leave a cart full of food and walk out. In front of everyone. Mom, you have to do something. This is all your fault. The blame, the complete and utter lack of self-awareness was staggering. My fault, David? I asked, my voice dangerously calm. I seem to recall you being the one who called me an embarrassment. You were the one who told me in front of 24 people that I was no longer welcome in your life. I was upset. I was stressed. I didn't mean it. He insisted, the pathetic, flimsy excuse of a child. But you did mean it, I said, the truth of it settling heavily between us. You've meant it for years. You just never had the courage to say it out loud until you thought you were powerful enough not to need me. You made your choice. I need you now, he cried, his voice breaking. Can't you just give me some money? Not the inheritance, just a loan? Just enough to get the lawyers off our backs and find a new place to live. And there it was. After all the humiliation, the betrayal, the heartbreak, it still always came back to money. No, David, I said, and the word was as final as a tombstone. I will not give you a single penny. Your father's inheritance was a test of character and you failed. My money, and I stressed the word my, letting it hang in the air, will not be a reward for that failure. This is the real world. Actions have consequences. It's time you learned how to stand on your own 2 feet. I hung up the phone. It was one of the hardest things I've ever had to do. A part of me, the mother in me, screamed to help him to ease his pain. But the wiser part of me, the part that Richard had trusted, knew that bailing him out now would teach him nothing. It would only reinforce his belief that he was entitled to be rescued. Sometimes the most loving thing a mother can do for her child is to let them fall and pray they learn how to get back up on their own. Meanwhile, Mr. Peterson had another decision for me to make. Eleanor, he said over the phone a few days later, his voice gentle, the committee has finalized the forfeiture. The $33 million, as per Richard's will, now defaults to the charitable foundation. However, Richard, in his foresight, included a subclause. It gives you, as the wronged party in the covenant, the option to claim the funds for yourself. $33 million. The money that had poisoned my son and cost me my family. The thought of touching it felt dirty, like blood money. No, I said without a moment's hesitation. Let it go to the charity. Let it build kitchens for kids who want to learn how to bake. Let it do some good in this world. That's what Richard would have wanted. As I put down the phone, I felt a profound sense of peace. The money was finally where it belonged, poised to create something beautiful instead of destroying it. But I knew the consequences for David and Tiffany were far from over. The most brutal one was yet to come. The story of what happened at the christening spread through Napa Valley like a wildfire. It became the cautionary tale whispered over glasses of expensive Chardonnay at dinner parties and charity luncheons. In a town that thrived on gossip, the public implosion of the Vance family was a feast. But something unexpected happened. The narrative I thought would be crazy old mother ruined son's party became something entirely different. Arthur Morgan had made sure of that. He was a man of immense influence, and he had been deeply offended by David's behavior. He told the story to anyone who would listen, always ending with the same line. The boy spat in the face of the woman who gave him everything. There's no coming back from that. Suddenly, I was viewed not as a troublemaker, but as a quiet titan of industry, a woman of principle who had been grievously wronged. People who had once been politely dismissive of the town baker now greeted me with a new level of deference and respect. I received calls from business owners I barely knew, offering their support. It was strange and uncomfortable, but it was also a quiet vindication. The person who felt the full force of this social shift was Tiffany. Her fair-weather friends, the women she had worked so hard to impress, abandoned her overnight. She was no longer a useful connection to a new fortune. She was a social pariah, inextricably linked to a story of greed and disrespect. To be seen with her was to be seen as endorsing her values, and no one wanted that stain on their reputation. I heard she tried to throw a lunch at the club, only to have every single person she invited decline with a flimsy excuse. She was an outcast in the very world she had sacrificed her soul to join. The most interesting call I received was from Mr. Morgan himself, about 2 weeks after the event. Eleanor, he said, his voice gruff as always, I hope I didn't overstep my bounds at that party. It wasn't my place, but I couldn't stand there and listen to that boy talk to you that way. You spoke the truth, Arthur, I told him sincerely. And I am grateful for it. Good, he grunted. Listen, the reason I'm calling. I'm on the board of the Culinary Institute. We're looking to fund a new scholarship for promising young bakers from low-income backgrounds. With the new funds from Richard's foundation, I was wondering if you'd allow us to name it the Richard and Eleanor Vance Scholarship for Artisanal Baking. Tears sprang to my eyes. To have our names associated not with a bitter inheritance dispute, but with helping young people achieve their dreams, it was the most beautiful tribute to Richard I could imagine. I would be honored, Arthur, I whispered. But while my world was quietly being stitched back together with threads of respect and community, David's was being torn apart at the seams. And the final, most devastating blow came not from a bank or a lawyer, but from his own wife. About a month after the christening, a sleek white envelope arrived at my doorstep. There was no return address. Inside was a single sheet of expensive stationery and a brief, typed note. It was from Tiffany. Eleanor, it read, I have left David. I have taken Lily with me and we are staying with my parents back east. My lawyer will be in touch with him regarding the divorce proceedings. The next part was what chilled me to the bone. You may have your precious principles and your secret little empire, but you have lost your son. And he has lost everything. I hope you're happy. I hope your money keeps you warm at night. The venom in her words was palpable. She wasn't just leaving a failed marriage. She was delivering a final spiteful curse. She blamed me for everything, for the loss of the life she felt she was entitled to. She had no concept of her own role, her own greed in their downfall. She saw herself as the victim. She had taken my granddaughter. That was her final act of cruelty. She knew it would hurt me more than anything else. I folded the letter, my hands trembling. She was wrong. Money didn't keep me warm at night. But her letter confirmed a cold, hard truth. She had never loved David. She had only loved the promise of his inheritance. The moment the money was gone, so was she. The divorce was the logical conclusion to a marriage that had been a business merger from the start. David was now completely alone. He had lost his inheritance, his home, his cars, his reputation, his wife, and his daughter. He had traded his mother's unconditional love for a life that had turned out to be a mirage. And then he vanished. His phone was disconnected. He didn't answer emails. He simply disappeared. For 6 long, agonizing months I heard nothing. I had nightmares of him homeless, destitute, lost. I had won the battle, but I couldn't shake the terrifying, gut-wrenching feeling that in the process, I had lost the war. I had lost my son forever. The 6 months that followed were the longest of my life. The victory felt hollow, the justice bitter. Every time the phone rang, my heart would leap with the desperate hope that it was him. Every time I saw a man on the street whose shoulders slumped with the same defeated posture I imagined David now had, my breath would catch in my throat. I hired a private investigator, a discreet man who confirmed David was alive, but not much else. He was living off the grid, taking odd jobs for cash, moving from one cheap motel to the next in the Central Valley. He was running not from the law but from himself. I thought about him every day. I thought about the choices I had made. Had I been too hard? Too unyielding? The mother in me was at war with the woman who had been so deeply betrayed. But every time I felt myself softening, I would remember his face at the christening, the cold dismissal in his eyes, and I knew I had done the only thing I could do. I had to let him hit rock bottom. Then one evening in late spring it happened. A storm had rolled in over the valley, the kind that rattles the windows and makes the world feel small and dark. I was in my kitchen, the familiar scent of baking bread filling the air, when I heard a soft, hesitant knock on the front door. It was so faint I almost thought it was just the wind, but it came again, a little louder this time. My heart started to pound. I wiped my flour-dusted hands on my apron and walked to the door, my legs feeling unsteady. I peered through the peephole and my breath hitched. It was David. I opened the door. He stood on my porch, drenched and shivering, looking like a ghost. The expensive suit was gone, replaced by worn-out jeans and a thin, threadbare jacket. He was gaunt, his face thin and pale, with dark circles under his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and a heavy heart. He looked 10 years older. He looked broken. He just stood there, rainwater dripping from his hair onto the welcome mat, not meeting my eyes. "David," I whispered. He finally looked up, and what I saw in his eyes made my own fill with tears. The arrogance, the greed, the anger, it was all gone. All that was left was a deep, bottomless well of shame and exhaustion. "Mom," he said, his voice raspy, broken. Can I come in?" I stepped aside and let him in. He dripped water onto the entryway rug, the one he used to play on with his toy cars as a boy. He seemed lost, overwhelmed, as if the warmth and light of the house were too much for him. I went to the kitchen and came back with a towel and a warm mug of tea. I handed them to him. His hands were trembling as he took the mug. We sat in silence for a long time in the living room, the only sounds the ticking of the grandfather clock and the drumming of the rain against the windows. Richard's armchair was still empty. Finally he spoke, his eyes fixed on the floor. "I got a job," he said quietly, "at a warehouse in Fresno. Loading trucks. It's hard work." He looked down at his hands. They were no longer the smooth hands of a man who sat in boardrooms. They were red and calloused, with dirt under the fingernails. They looked like my hands. "The salary is not much," he continued, "but it's honest. For the first time in a long time I feel like I've actually earned something." He took a shaky breath. "I've been living in this little room, Mom, and at night when it's quiet, all I can think about is what I did. What I said to you." Tears started to stream down his face, silent and steady. He didn't try to wipe them away. "I was a monster. I was so blinded by the money, by what Tiffany wanted, by what I thought I wanted. I became someone I don't even recognize." He looked at me then, his eyes pleading. "I don't want your money, Mom. I swear. I will never ask you for another dime. I lie awake every night and the last thing I see is your face at that party. And the shame, it's eating me alive." He finally broke down completely, his shoulders shaking with ragged sobs. "I was a terrible son," he choked out, "and a terrible father. Tiffany won't even let me talk to Lily on the phone. She said I'm a disgrace. And she's right." This wasn't the desperate, entitled pleading I'd heard on the phone months ago. This was the raw, agonizing sound of a man who had lost everything and finally understood why. He wasn't asking for a handout. He wasn't asking for forgiveness. He was just confessing. I went to the kitchen and cut a thick slice of the warm bread I had just baked. I spread butter on it and brought it to him. He took it, his hands shaking, and ate it like a starving man. He had hit rock bottom. And in that dark, lonely place he had finally found a piece of the boy I thought I had lost forever. The question now was, what would I do with it? Watching him eat that simple slice of bread and butter, I saw him not as the arrogant stranger from the party, but as my son. My lost, broken son. The anger I had held onto for so long finally dissolved, replaced by a wave of overwhelming, heartbreaking love. He had a long road ahead of him. The damage he had caused couldn't be erased with a single night of tearful confessions. Trust, once shattered, had to be rebuilt piece by piece, like a delicate mosaic. "The first thing you need to do," I said, my voice gentle but firm, "is find a better place to live than a motel room. And you need a lawyer. Not for me, David. For your daughter. You need to fight for your right to be her father." He looked up, hope warring with despair in his eyes. "How? I have nothing." "You have a job," I countered. "And you have a mother. I will not give you money for a fancy lifestyle, but I will help you pay for a lawyer to fight for custody of my granddaughter. And I will help you with the deposit on a small, clean apartment. This is not a gift, David. It is an investment in the man I hope you can become." And so we began. It was a slow, arduous process. David found a small apartment in a modest neighborhood. He kept his job at the warehouse, waking up before dawn every day, coming home exhausted but with a new sense of purpose. I hired the best family lawyer in the state for him. The custody battle with Tiffany was brutal. She used his past arrogance and financial ruin against him, painting him as an unstable failure. But David didn't fight back with anger. He fought back with consistency. He showed up to every court date. He passed every evaluation. He demonstrated through his actions that he was a changed man. After a year, the judge granted him supervised visitation rights. The first time he brought Lily to my house, he was a nervous wreck. Lily, now a toddler, was shy at first. But I had a secret weapon. I brought out a bowl of cookie dough, and soon all three of us had flour on our noses. Watching David patiently show his daughter how to roll out the dough, his calloused hands gentle and sure, I saw the father he was always meant to be. He started spending his weekends at my house. Not because he had to, but because he wanted to. We didn't talk much about the past. Instead, we built a new future. He started helping me at the bakery, at first just sweeping floors and stocking shelves. But he was a quick learner, and he had an innate business sense he'd inherited from Richard. He saw ways to streamline inventory to improve our online presence. One day he came to me with a proposal. He wanted to start a new line for Sweet Traditions. A line of simple rustic breads and pies based on my original family recipes. "We'll call it the Founder's Line," he said, his eyes shining with an enthusiasm I hadn't seen in years. "To honor where we came from." Today, David is the Chief Operating Officer of Sweet Traditions. He didn't inherit the position. He earned it. He works harder than anyone I know. He now has partial custody of Lily, and he is a wonderful, devoted father. Our relationship isn't what it used to be. It's stronger. It's not built on obligation or history, but on a new foundation of mutual respect and hard-won forgiveness. The empty armchair in my living room doesn't seem so empty anymore. Sometimes when we're in the kitchen together, our hands covered in flour, he'll look at me and just say, "Thank you, Mom." He's not thanking me for the second chance. He's thanking me for letting him fail, for believing he was strong enough to find his own way back. I wanted to share this story with all of you, not to boast about wealth or to revel in a family's pain, but to share a simple truth I learned a very hard way. The greatest inheritance we can ever receive isn't money, stocks, or property. It's the values instilled in us, the character forged through hardship, and the unwavering love of family. Respect can never be bought, and it can never be demanded. Can only ever be earned. Thank you so much for listening to my story today. It means the world to me to be able to share it. I have to ask, has anyone out there ever had to make a tough choice to teach a loved one a difficult lesson? I'd be honored to read your experiences in the comments below. If my story resonated with you, please consider giving it a like and subscribe for more stories from the heart.